Good morning and welcome to Privacy Conversations. I'm Daniel Solov. I'm here with Justin Antoni Pillay, and we have a wonderful panel today to talk on Women's Equality Day. And I'd like to kick it over to Justin at Wire Wheel to introduce our panelists and our topic.
Terrific. Dan, great to see you again. I know you, like we, have been getting just a phenomenal amount of feedback on the sessions we've been having over these last couple of months. And I know I speak for you when I say we are really proud to, our team at Wire Wheel and your team at Teach Privacy, to celebrate Women's Equality Day with an absolutely outstanding panel of leaders, mentors, speakers in the privacy community who've joined us here today. Let me briefly introduce our speakers, and we're going to have a conversation around Women's Equality Day on a number of different subjects. Elisa Bergman, Chief Privacy Officer at Adobe. Tanisha Gordon, one of the senior leaders in the privacy practice at Deloitte. Lindsay Finch, the Data Protection Officer and one of the well-known leaders in the field as well at Salesforce. And Susan Markell, who is the VP of Engineering and one of our senior leaders at Wire Wheel. First of all four of you, welcome to our panel, and I really appreciate all four of you joining this discussion in celebration of Women's Equality Day today. As I mentioned when we were setting up the session, Dan and I wanted to really not lead this discussion because we just have an incredible group of leaders here with us today. But one of the things we hear about all the time when we're engaging with the community, Wire Wheel, when we let it spokes or when we are out speaking is, a lot of the folks in our privacy community would love to hear more about our speakers and our leaders, to tell your story of how you got here in an evolving field. How did you rise to be a leader at some of these incredible companies and really are helping to develop the field? And we thought that would be a great way to start the discussion today. So if you don't mind, I thought we'd go one by one to start the conversation on these subjects. And I'll ask each of you, and maybe Elisa, I'll start with you, if you don't mind. Tell the community a little bit your story of how you came to be the Chief Privacy Officer at Adobe. And along the way, were there challenges or lessons you learned that bear on the issue of women's equality? And were there mentors or sponsors or folks that helped you along the way that you wanted to recognize in some way? Yeah. So maybe, Elisa, do you mind if I start with you and we can kind of go through everybody to get the discussion started?
Yeah, sure. So thank you so much for inviting me to participate, Justin. You're right, it's a very esteemed panel, and it's really an honor and a pleasure to talk to everyone on such an important day. I get asked to speak a lot about the future of privacy, and this is a different lens on the future of privacy, but it's actually one of the most important lenses on the future of privacy because it's the future of the people in privacy and leadership in privacy and the community of privacy. So nothing could be closer to my heart than that. So thank you again for this opportunity. A little bit about my story. I come from a long line of musicians, and all of my family is musicians. In fact, I was a music major in college. And true story, I think, although my parents will deny it if they ever see this. I think that I'm probably the only kid whose parents are disappointed that she went to law school and didn't pursue her career in music. So I'm the family disappointment that I went on to law school. But knowing that I would never be the next Yo-Yo Ma, I pursued my second passion and hobby, which was really to do work in policy and politics. And I decided after college to move to Washington, DC. I worked on Capitol Hill for a while. And I really decided, wow, this is so exciting. This is exactly what I want to do. I went to law school at Georgetown, and it seems like many moons ago now. And I took a class which seemed very futuristic at the time. And it was a class on cyberspace law. And I thought, wow, this is it for me. I can marry my passion for policy with what the future of the commercial internet is going to be like. And I want to write all the rules of the road of the information superhighway. So I have always wanted to work in this space. I knew exactly what I wanted at the beginning. I know a lot of people talk about how they fell into privacy. There was nobody to do it, so they raised their hand and now they love it. This was something that I've always wanted to do from the very beginning. So that's how I got into privacy. Early on, as you can imagine, in the United States, with the different approaches to privacy here and in Europe and worldwide, there weren't a lot of law firms that had privacy practices. There are very few. I sought one out, which was at the time, sort of a white shoe, Baltimore-based law firm, which is now one of the biggest law firms in the world. And they had a privacy practice, and there was a team there working on policy issues around data, really working on Section 230 issues at the time, working on COPPA, children's privacy, those types of issues. And I knew that's exactly where I wanted to go. And at the time, the firm was really sort of the view that we wouldn't take first-year associates. They wouldn't have enough background to be able to do these types of issues. But this was my first challenge, getting into a privacy practice where they weren't going to take folks who just graduated from law school. But with my can-do sort of attitude, I thought, well, I'm not going to take no. I'm going to be sure to get in there, and I'm going to make sure that they want me there too. So I got into the firm as a summer associate, and I raised my hand, which would be a piece of advice I'd tell folks always raise your hand to do what you want to do and never take no for an answer. And I worked on a few projects, actually. I worked on an FTC investigation into GeoCities, which ultimately became where privacy went for children. And from there, the bug just got me, and I was doing privacy ever since. So started at DLA Piper, worked at a few other leading law practices. I was in Washington, D.C. for a while, had a really exciting practice for me. It was doing policy work, helping shape laws on the front end, working at with clients to write the rules in response to notice and comments at the Federal Trade Commission. What should those rules be? Implementing the laws, counseling compliance, working on investigations. It was a super dynamic and exciting practice. I thought to myself, the world is global, and just living in Washington, D.C. and just doing privacy laws in the United States wasn't enough for me. I wanted to do more. So I moved to Europe to see if I could replicate the practice that I had in Washington, D.C. there. And I did just that too. It was a lobbying legislative practice there, sort of replicating the work that I did there. After that, I was asked to move in-house and create the privacy office and the privacy function at Warner Brothers. Super exciting for me to build a privacy practice from the ground up. It was a client that I'd had for a really long time. So that was really exciting to become even closer to the business and to fill the responsibility of building a privacy practice from the ground up. And after that, I came to Adobe, and now I'm leading the privacy, trust, and safety team, and I'm responsible for privacy and data.
I mean, the role you have, Elisa, is a very high-profile role, right? Marketing sits at the center of so many of the discussions when it comes to privacy. Obviously, we have Salesforce here too, Lindsay. I mean, you're talking about two folks that are just at the center of it. How did you rise to that, to be a leader in that field? And, I don't know, were there times where, or lessons you learned or challenges you faced that you think the community could benefit from hearing about on the issue of women's equality? Or were there sponsors or mentors or folks that really helped you along the way that you thought you could talk about?
Yeah, sure. I would say, I was actually looking back at it overnight. One of my main sponsors and mentors was a gentleman who passed away quite a while ago, but I realized the indelible impression that both he and the rest of my practice group had on me. And his name is Ron Plusser, for those of you who do know him from the Washington, D.C. Area. And I was just looking back last night at the remarks that I made at his funeral, and there's so many lessons that he taught me, and maybe I'll share a few of them with you if that's okay. Some of them was exactly on this topic, which was that I was mentored, and it's so important to pass the torch and mentor and give back. And I think when I was younger, I didn't fully understood that. I felt it almost as an obligation, as opposed to feeling the joy that you get from mentorship and just really the excitement that you get, the passion that I had for privacy, to be able to ignite that into somebody else and to pay it forward and to open doors for other people. It's really something that gives me great pride and that I'm so excited about. So that would be one lesson. The other one that he's taught me, which is super important to me, and it becomes even more important in this pandemic, and I know we'll talk more about that, really is compassionate listening and compassionate understanding. It's so often that he taught me, and it's been my experience, that people really want to be understood and they want to be heard. And we need that now even more than ever. And oftentimes those are really traditional leadership qualities of women, and they can really be called upon and celebrated in this moment, where we can understand the different challenges that our people are going through, to be able to support them, and really to help them to achieve their best potential. So those are among the two and important qualities that he taught me. And I guess I'd also like to recognize Jim Halpert, Milo Cividanis, and Stu Ingus, if we're calling out folks who were part of kind of the original team that I've always worked with. So all mentors along the way.
Oh, and that's an important, that part of it. And I think each of us along the way had folks that you think about in that way, Elisa. And so we'll come back to you in 1 second. I thought maybe then I could turn to you, Tanisha, next, and then Lindsay. Tanisha, do you mind talking a little bit about your journey to I'm in a very senior position and obviously a leader in the field, and were there challenges along the way, or mentors, sponsors that you think about?
Absolutely. And Elisa, I love hearing your story, because I have a similar trajectory, but like the inverse. So I always wanted to be a lawyer since I was like 9. And I really thought I was going to be a lawyer, and literally the only thing that compelled me to want to pursue the field of law was that there was like a show and tell event in school in elementary, and a lawyer came, and I don't know what he said, but he had a top hat on, a trench coat, and a briefcase. And I was just like, I want to wear that outfit. That is so cool. Right. So my entire adolescent, I wanted to be a lawyer. And even actually in my high school, you're able to major in specifics, only 4 topics: computer science, physics, law, and I actually forget the 4th. And I was pre-law, which means I was able to take law classes as a sophomore in high school in New York at John Jay College. And you had at least 1 law course every year, every semester. And I did that. And then I decided to go to Cornell, because I know they had a way for you to do a minor in legal affairs. So I went to Cornell, and then I was preparing for law school, and, I was ahead in my class because I took all those, pre-college courses. And I started to get anxiety about taking the LSATs, because I know what law school I wanted to go to as well. I was just like one of those really crazy kids. And I started to get anxiety, and my advisor said, you're a semester and a half ahead. Why don't you get your master's in public policy, which will position you really well for the top law schools. So I was already ahead. So I was just like, let me just get this master's. And as part of that program, I started to take business courses. So it was half government and policy courses and then half business courses. So then I start taking these business courses, private equity, consulting. I joined the consulting club. And then all of a sudden I fell in love with consulting. And it was such a big chasm. At that time, I already had internships at some of the top law firms in New York as a undergrad, right? My mentor from I was 14 till throughout college was also an attorney at Dewey Ballantine. And she was also expecting me to go to law school. And then I fell in love with consulting, and I was like, what do I do? So literally I went to Google, and I was just like, and Google was also very new. It was like, how do you search for this thing on the internet? And I put in policy, government, consulting, and then Booz Allen popped up as the first thing. And I said, that's where I'm going. So literally I applied to Booz Allen, and I went to work there, and I joined the strategy and transformation team. And what we did was we did strategy and transformation for all types of government organizations. And there were several instances where I had the opportunity to design and build like privacy program, fraud detection programs, security programs, build out full end-to-end breach response programs. At that time, I was super heavy in strategy and transformation. So worked with a lot of like women-owned startups, minority-owned startups. I started my own nonprofit. So I got really comfortable with building things and strategy. And it was when it was during the financial crisis back in like '09, I believe. And I was just like, wait, these are some of the biggest banks that had some of the best strategies. I have friends at these institutions. And I was just like, we know all of the story around the financial crisis, but for me, it hit me differently because I was thinking about it from a strategy perspective. And I said the one thing that they didn't do was like manage their risk. So I was like, what is this thing called risk? And I started researching. I was like, okay, risk is also why I'm building these breach programs, because risk wasn't managed well. This is why I'm building these fraud detection program because of the risk to the consumer. So I started to get into risk, and then I uploaded my resume to some portal, and Deloitte identified it. And I had an opportunity to either join the strategy group, which I was doing for a while, or join their risk practice, which was specifically privacy and security risk and general technology risk. And I joined Deloitte literally just by uploading my resume. And I was just like, I need to get out of strategy because you can have the best strategy in the world, but if you don't manage risk, you'll fail. So then I joined our tech risk practice. And at that point in time, it was security and privacy was within that group. And I was hired by the leader that actually started our practice, which was a female executive about over 25 years ago. And I was able to really get deeper into privacy and security and get more exposure to data risk generally. But in those days, privacy was kind of an afterthought. They were still trying to figure out how to make security a forethought, like in the front. And privacy was very reactive. It was like if there was a breach coming in, cleaning that up, and then building out the privacy program. It was always event driven or platform driven, the work that we were doing. And similar to you, Alyssa, I got really comfortable scaling global, programs and just really helping across different industries. And then I started to focus on healthcare and life sciences. And it was around 2013 where I said, you know what? I read an article, I think it was a HBS article, a Harvard Business Review article of sort, that was highlighting the fact that there was this massive influx of acquisition, M&A activity. But it was different in this time because it wasn't about creating new products or creating new synergies. It was all, when you look, because usually M&A, you want to acquire IP, you want to acquire some sort of capability. It was all about expanding globally. And I was like, wow, these companies, this uptick of acquisitions globally is really for these companies to have global reach. So I thought, I need to have a global experience. I need to understand how to advise global clients effectively. So let me move to Europe. Because at that time we were waiting like 12 years for GDPR to come out. It was named something else back then as well. And because pre-GDPR, we would have to work with global companies and rationalize their requirements across like 30 jurisdictions. And it was just like a nightmare. We were all the privacy professionals were just waiting for this holy grail for Europe, because at least we would not have to rationalize those requirements. So I was able to, it took me a while to get to Europe, but then I went to Europe around 2014, 2015, spent several years there and was able to get true cultural exposure to how GDPR was actually crafted, exposure to the regulators, exposure to like European companies and how they think about compliance. And it's a little different than our American counterparts. And that was super, it was an incredible experience. And then I decided to pivot to TMT and move back to the US because I was in Europe and I saw that, a lot of privacy regulation was going to totally disrupt our technology, media, and telco clients that are just not used to being regulated. I was used to working with the healthcare, life sciences. They know how to be regulated. FSI, big banks, they are used to being regulated, so they can consume these privacy regulations and changes a little bit more, with a little bit more agility, where I thought, okay, our clients are going to really need help. So then that's how I got to California, Justin. I'm not sure that if you knew that. And right now I cover all of our technology and media clients in terms of privacy, data risk generally, so data strategy, data governance, data privacy, and data protection. And to your latter question, Justin, around how I was able to navigate some of the challenges around equal pay or sponsorship. I've had incredible sponsors, like globally, that have helped me along the way, like just so many, from teaching me how to don't just work and expect people to know the good work you're doing. Like, I think for me, especially, and for many women, it's so hard to boast about yourself or talk yourself up, but like, or selling yourself. Like, I didn't even know that was a concept. And like, I had to learn that. And I learned that through proper sponsorship. And, also learning how to leverage some of my natural skills and what that means in a business context, and what that means in how to help the client, exercising empathy. Of course, most of the time I'm helping clients with, privacy challenges, data risk challenges, but sometimes it's like they just need someone to talk to about their career, how to navigate their career. So being flexible and thinking about my role as an advisor more holistically, like helping my clients as an organization, but that person, that individual as an organism as well. And in terms of pay, I've had some challenges in my journey. And I tell you what, like, sponsorship is so important. And I'm going to say something provocative, but also male sponsorship, them teaching you how to not be afraid to ask for more, how to read the tea leaves, how to read the room, and literally just being brave. And most of the time, some of them just taking the charge and say, oh, you have that issue, and they'll go figure it out and like fix it. And I have a lot of use cases to show the difference where, and again, this is going to sound provocative, but women, I think sometimes we're so used to just playing it safe, or like, I see this all the time, like a male will raise their hand and say, I can do that job. And they may be like 50%, have the 50 to 70% of the skill set. And they're like, I can do it. And like a female will just be like, I only know about it 95%. I don't know if I can do it. And like being able to adopt some of that male psyche has like really been rewarding for my career and has accelerated my trajectory. And I have like two scenarios where I raise my hand about a pay disparity to a female and a pay disparity to a male. And the reactions were different. Like the female was used to even her having a pay disparity. And the male was like, that's not acceptable. Okay, I'll fix it. So like, I think it's also up to women to, when we get into places of power, to continue to change the way that we think to bring the rest up as well.
Tanisha, you've raised some awesome points that I know all of us want to talk about as well. And the pay issue, I think, would be a really good subject for us to pick up in a moment. I think it is meaningful, and I think with each of you talking about your experiences, if we could, I think it would really help, as we go. If you don't mind, I wanted to make sure I gave Lindsay and Susan a chance to also kind of talk about how you got here. That's always important framing. And then maybe if you feel comfortable with that, we could return to this critical issue of pay equality and how to approach that, and how you've approached that personally, because we've seen that. We've seen that dynamic in a number of different ways. So Lindsay, do you mind if I turn to you next and tell us this? By the way, if you're watching the community that's even joined us today, there are hundreds of comments already talking about how important it is to hear the stories, how inspiring they are. You're each getting requests to serve as mentors, so you're going to have to look at those requests as well. But Lindsay, why don't we turn over to you, if you don't mind, and talk a little bit about how you got here and challenges and support you've had along the way.
Sure. Well, thank you so much to Justin and Dan, and I'm just so honored to be on the same panel as Elisa and Tanisha and Susan. So it's great to be with you all today. So like Elisa, I didn't set out to be a lawyer, and I think our parents might need to communicate a bit, Elisa, because I think they're still a little bit disappointed that I did become a lawyer. I wanted to be a journalist. I was editor-in-chief of my high school's newspaper. I went to journalism camp while I was in high school. I was like 14 years old and just very, very clear that I was going to be a journalist. I loved writing. And when I was an undergrad, I interned in Washington, D.C. in the Public Affairs Office of the Federal Trade Commission. And the Public Affairs Office really works with the press, hence the tie there to journalism. And I was assigned to obtain press for the FTC's Children's Online Information Security and Privacy Campaign. They had a mascot named Dewey the Turtle, and the idea was that Dewey was going to be the next Smokey the Bear. And so I spent the 6 months of my internship working very closely with those in the Public Affairs Office, but also Commissioner Orson Swindle, who was really the commissioner who sponsored the effort. And while Dewey didn't, we got some press coverage for him, while Dewey didn't have quite the impact that I think we had originally hoped. My love for all things at the intersection of technology, law, and policy was born. And Commissioner Swindle was one of the few commissioners in the history of the FTC who was not a lawyer, but could see that I was really interested in that and began introducing me to lawyers in the commission. And he joked that his biggest disappointment of my internship would be if I decided to actually go to law school, but I know he's quite proud of how things turned out. So I went to law school from there, and there were no privacy classes. I mean, I think intellectual property and contracts were the closest thing you really could get to. But I continued to intern, and Orson really early on in my career was just an incredible mentor and sponsor, and introduced me to so many people in the privacy community. And I returned to the FTC for a stint. I worked for Nuala O'Connor at the Department of Homeland Security Privacy Office, just as that was getting stood up. And I was actually given the opportunity to join Nuala when she went to General Electric, just as I was finishing up law school. And I was talking to one of my professors about going into privacy law, and particularly going directly in-house from law school. And this professor was incredibly well-meaning, but he told me that it was a bizarre niche area that would lead to an unfulfilling career with limited economic prospects. And I didn't have a crystal ball. I didn't necessarily think he was wrong, but I just knew that I really liked it. And I thought, you know what, I'm gonna just go ahead and give this a shot. If it doesn't work out, I'm sure I can figure something else out. And so I joined Nuala at GE, and was at GE in Washington, D.C. for several years. And the head of government affairs at Salesforce and I had met at a conference and started talking. And he said that they were looking for someone to lead their privacy program. And at the time, Salesforce was a much smaller company, about 2,000 people around the world. And the term cloud computing did not yet exist. Everything was about software as a service. And as I started to learn more about the company, what I found both electrifying in both a wonderful but also a bit of a terrifying way was, wow, this entire company is built on the internet. If they don't get these issues right, I mean, this really goes to the heart of the business. And so took a leap of faith, moved from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco to join Salesforce. And I've now been there for about 12 and a half years. And the company has grown a lot in that period. And obviously the regulatory landscape has shifted, technological innovations. And so I'm happy to say that my law professor was wrong, but I don't necessarily think I knew that he was wrong. I was just so fascinated with this intersection of technology, law, and policy. And I've mentioned some of the important people along my career path already, really starting with Orson, who was FTC commissioner at the time, Nuala O'Connor, Dan Caprio, Harriet Pearson, who's at Hogan Lovells, Lisa Soto at Hunton, Maureen Cooney, who is now at Sprint. And I think, what, especially not coming from a family of lawyers or people who are in this space at all, having people who really help me to see possibilities and think bigger in this area and to really believe in me. I mean, I come from a very supportive family, but this is just not their space. And so while they were incredibly supportive, they didn't necessarily have the ability to help me see what was possible. And as so at Salesforce now, I lead the privacy team, and I also lead our product legal team, which looks after our compliance with all of our legal obligations and providing our services to customers. And so obviously privacy is a big part of that, but also a lot of other areas that aren't related to privacy. And when my current boss, Amy Weaver, Salesforce's general counsel, first asked me about leading the product legal team about 6 years ago, I told her, I said, Amy, I don't have experience in all of these areas. I'm a born and bred privacy lawyer. I don't know the first thing about open source licensing. I've just dabbled a bit in technology transactions. And she's like, that doesn't matter. This is a team of subject matter experts. You're going to learn it. You're going to knock it out of the park. And I think, Tanisha talked a bit about this as well. I think that something that is just so important for women in particular, and for anyone who is working with women, is to really think bigger and believe in yourself and understand that you don't have to have 100%, 90% of the expertise that might seem necessary. And that's something that you really can learn. And it's been just a wonderful experience leading the product legal team and growing that team over the last 6 years. And that would really just be my advice, is to think bigger, really understand the impact of what you're doing. I think that's something that I've also very much learned from the mentors and sponsors in my life. And also, figuring out the technology. I am not a technologist. I do not have a computer science degree, but I'm able to hold my own in the technical meetings by just really rolling up my sleeves and learning it. So it's wonderful to be with you guys today. It's such an important day, and look forward to talking more about these issues.
Lindsay, that was great. By the way, Dewey the Turtle, I mean, how's that not received more recognition somewhere else? And Dan, I mean, somebody's got to have a conversation with that law professor. This privacy field's clearly going nowhere, right, Dan?
Yeah, well, I remember early on, I definitely thought that, people thought it was just a niche area and not much would happen, and everyone would ask, what is privacy law? There were very few firms doing it, very few people in it, very few job prospects in it, and a lot of people just didn't know. I think a lot of people don't even know now just how big the field is, even though I think in a lot of law schools, it's still, the majority of law schools still don't have a course, which is shocking just given how big this field is and how many opportunities there are. And I think for a lot of folks, their picture of what practice is like was when they were at a law firm or in practice at the beginning of their career. But for a lot of professors, that could be 20, 30 years ago. And by the way, I do remember Dewey the Turtle. I actually took the graphic and had a slide in my class with Dewey on it. And it just said, suddenly just vanished.
My internship ended, Dan.
Away, but,
Yeah, I'm not sure any of those agencies have the marketing budgets to put behind Dewey the Turtle, although, it's always something to come. That was terrific, Lindsay. And again, I'm going to come back to some of these items because they're really important. I want to make sure I give Susan a chance to talk as well. Now, Susan is also obviously a leader in the privacy field, and Susan leads our engineering team. And one of the things we're quite proud about at Wirewheel our leadership on product and R&D, both senior women on our team, and that's awesome. So, and from the engineering side, this is a part of the community that we hear about all the time, how difficult it is to have leaders that are women. So, but Susan, I thought maybe you could just start by telling your story. How did you rise to the position, and support or challenges?
Yeah. Yeah, so my trajectory was very different coming from the tech side. I probably never would have taken a computer science course if it weren't for my dad, who was my first advocate, I guess. And I was a math major in college, and he said, you know, I want you to take one computer science course. It's my only request, and I took it, and of course loved it, and decided that's the way I wanted to go. I guess the next big advocate for me was my computer science professor. I went to a liberal arts school, so it was small. Computer science wasn't even a major at the time. And he actually recommended me for my very first position, which kind of set me off. So I started worked in Boston for about 4 years at an interactive web agency when there were no websites. Like, companies just didn't have websites yet. It was early on. And I spent about 4 years there. Liked it. It was fine, but was starting to kind of get an itch for something bigger. It was a small company that wasn't really growing. I had someone I knew worked at Symantec in cybersecurity, and when you talk about taking leaps and not having any idea anything about cybersecurity or having worked at a product company before, it was a leap. And what I found, I stayed at Symantec for about 9 years, and if you don't know anything about cybersecurity, it is very, very much male dominated, and on the engineering and development side, even more so. So I worked with colleagues there that I work with today at Wirewheel, like the folks I still work together with. And what I learned through that experience was it's important to have bosses that care and advocates and leadership that care, but peers matter so much for that peer support. And the men that can look and say, that's not right, Susan, you were mistreated, or hey, let me help you out here to support you here. And I think that throughout my time at Symantec, and then later when I worked at Mandiant with a lot of previous colleagues from Symantec, it became just really clear to me how much that network and that support next to me helped build that confidence to say, you know what, I can do this next thing. I can take that. I know nothing about kernel development, but I can run the kernel development team. Why not? Like, I can do it. I'm a leader. I have these soft skills that team is missing. And as I kind of went through, so I went from Symantec, where we did managed security services. No one talked about privacy. This was at a time when folks cared a lot about antivirus and firewalls, and we did a lot of like monitoring things there. To Mandiant, who kind of rethought through how things were going. That was mostly incident response work, and that was very, very much male dominated. I think on the when I started in engineering, there were like 3 other women on the entire engineering team. So it was very, and one of the other ones being a leader. So there, it was nice to see that it just really didn't, like, the culture of the team was such that it didn't matter if you were a woman or a man. It didn't matter, you know, if you were very junior or very senior, your ideas mattered. And I think I came to find that culture of a team, and particularly on the engineering side, was a real passion of mine. And as we kind of transitioned into, so Mandiant got bought by FireEye, and I could see that same culture with that new leadership wasn't as appreciated as much. So I had an opportunity to move to with a former colleague who gave me a chance to manage a greenfield team at an access management company. And then gave me more opportunities on top of that when he saw that, yeah, she knows what she's doing. I can trust her. And his name's Keith Graham. He's a COO at Storvacity now, but he was like incredibly, I would say the chances that he took on me at a time when I think he was people were taking a chance on him, really let me kind of move forward into something that was much broader than what I had. That was very much appreciated. And then after that, I came to work with Justin through another referral from our former CTO. So it was, which has been fantastic. I mean, I think the the most notable thing about Wire Wheel, and I don't mean to sell Wire Wheel right now, but I will. I think the most notable thing about coming into Wire Wheel was it was the first company I'd worked with in a very long time where there were women in leadership roles. On the product side, and especially in security, it just wasn't common. Like you'd see women in marketing and marketing roles, and in sometimes in usually HR, but you would never see women in other kind of positions. And when I started, we had like our head of operations was a woman, and it felt very much more inclusive. And they cared not only about gender diversity, but diversity as a whole. And it really I feel like it's really allowed us to build a culture of like inclusivity and innovation in a way that not many companies, you don't have that opportunity very often. So.
Honestly, Susan, I mean, it's great to hear your story too. Like, no matter how much time you spend with somebody, to hear folks tell their stories from their own perspective, it's inspiring. And I can tell, from folks even watching today. I did want to also like use this, you raised some issues about what it's like to work in a diverse environment, but each of you have raised in the course of introducing just your background, issues of pay equality, equality of opportunity, how you get the opportunity to do the next job that's like the one where you feel a little bit at risk. I mean, I know for me, one of the pieces of advice I got early in my career was live your professional career a little on a knife's edge. Just do jobs that you feel like you may not be ready for, because that's the only way you grow, right? You should feel nervous a little bit in your job at all times. And that's kind of, some of the points that were raised. So on both, maybe I'll just open it up for, Susan, Lindsay, Tanisha, Elisa, you also brought your own points, but to any one of you on either pay equality, have you had to fight for it in your own way? Equality of opportunity and being able to take that next risky challenge. Are there lessons that we can bring from some of the things you've talked about so far on either one of those issues?
I'll jump in if that's okay, Justin. I guess I would say equal access is not equitable access. So on things like pay parity, I really think the next step is opportunity parity and some of the things we've been talking about. And I've heard it described this way, which is it's one thing to invite people to the party. It's another thing to ask them to dance. So it's really this, really the next opportunity, giving folks the tools that they need to start at the starting line and really thinking about equitable opportunity for all. So thinking about that when it comes to pay, knowing your value, what you're actually worth. I know a lot of times, even when I was younger too, and I know Tanisha, you mentioned this as well too, I just wanted to do good work and I really wasn't concerned, if you will, about what I'd be paid, but really understanding and knowing your value to feel valued, to be sort of paid in that way. And I think you can do a lot of benchmarking. There's lots of surveys out there. I think now, I know I serve in that role for a lot of people, and it sounds like we might be serving it for more people based on what you said was in the chat conversation, Justin. But there are people out there who'll be willing to talk to you about that, so you can get that data to understand what you should be paid. But one of the things I would say on top of all of that, which became very important for me too, is being paid in money is not the only way to think about the value and sort of what you're getting out of things. It's really important, and I've done this exercise, and I continue to do it all the time too, and thinking about what's really important to you in the job that you had. I know Lindsay talked about this, and Susan talked about this as well too, but being at a place where what you do matters, having a boss who gets you, being really mission critical to at Salesforce and Adobe, what your company is doing, that actually pays you a lot in dividends. And so all of that, thinking about that in terms of pay parity, all of the things that are really important to you, thinking about that as part of the package.
And just to jump in on equal pay, I think it was last spring that the IAPP released a salary survey that showed, particularly in the United, while salaries overall were increasing for privacy professionals, at least in the United States, women were not making as much as men. And I think something that I have seen both myself and also as I have hired is that women do tend to not negotiate salaries when they're offered jobs. And that can set us back pretty far financially over time when raises are based on a percentage of what your salary was before. And I think that it's something that I think women really need to be aware of when they are being offered a job, is whether to negotiate. And on the topic of equal pay more broadly, back in 2015, Salesforce began an equal pay initiative. We did an audit looking at all of the salaries across the company for like jobs, and really making sure that not only for gender, but also as a matter of race, that there were not discrepancies. And we've paid out now over the last 5 years, $12.1 million to ensure equal pay, because a lot of this isn't necessarily, I think, I hope at least that it's not intentional, but a lot of this, I think, does come back to women not negotiating their starting salary. And so I think that's something that just women need to be very aware of.
Yeah, as I've done interviewing, I found that sometimes women are like, becomes a confidence question. And if you're not projecting confidence because it's not the natural way that you interact, you might be more reluctant to have those negotiations. You might have more of that. So I've always tried to tell my teams, like, we need to look at competency, not confidence, because what we care about is the competency. And I think, like, as you're talking about equal pay, I wonder how much that plays into kind of those initial conversations. Is that just general reluctance of not having the confidence to do so?
I think that's super spot on, Susan, because I think the confidence versus competence, like how you show up, at the end of the day, humans are actually doing the interviews and part of the gatekeepers of, letting people into an organization. And there are a lot of, implicit biases in the recruiting and hiring process. And Deloitte, we also did a study on that. And I think that plays into it, plus what Lindsay was saying in terms of the reluctancy of women to actually negotiate. So, I think if there wasn't some implicit bias in there, the pay gap will be equal across all women of different colors. So, for example, for Black women, we only make 60 to 65% on the dollar of every dollar that a white male make, where a white woman would make 80 cents. A Latina will make 58 cents on a dollar, right? So I think it's a combination of confidence, competence, how to show up, and then the perception of that, and then any other biases that may be in that system, and being aware of that. So yeah, there's all these different forces, and I think if we lay them out plain, it's easier for us to kind of address those, and then figuring out how do we advocate for each other and be more confident, or change what you're saying, Susan, change the dynamics of the recruiting process to just actually pay attention to skill and competency.
So Lindsay, I have a question for you. How did Salesforce, if you're able to share, how did Salesforce go about that initiative? Like, that seems, I can imagine the finance folks being like, what, you want to do what?
Thank you for asking, and it's a really great story. So, two former colleagues and just real inspirations to me at Salesforce, women, Layla Seika and Cindy Robbins, were kind of just getting the sense in the company that there was no intent behind it, but it seemed that from their observations that men might be in some cases being paid more. And they went directly to our CEO and said, we need to do this. And the CEO talks about this actually in one of his books, about how he was reluctant at first, saying equality is one of our core values as a company. Of course we don't have a problem. It's like, okay, well then we don't have a problem, and this shouldn't reveal anything that we need to do. But it did show that there were some gaps, and the company's committed to doing this on an annual basis, because I think that when we're talking about gender equality, racial equality, this is not something that happens at one moment in time. This is something that really does need to be ongoing, and that we need to be really intentional about. And so the company is committed to doing this every year, and we actually talk about it a fair amount on a public-facing website that we have. If you just Google Salesforce pay equality.
That's impressive. Really impressive.
Yeah, and it's interesting. One of the things Susan and I talk about fairly often is you have to just ask the questions and know the information on these things. For example, just merely asking when you're doing a sales, like a salary adjustment for one person who's asked. So let's assume somebody's asked. From my perspective, just merely asking the question, okay, we're going to do that one. Let's assume. Who else should we be considering? Like, who hasn't asked and why? Are there people that should be in parity that aren't? By asking the question, you actually, in the company, end up identifying these things, sometimes heuristically, sometimes data-driven. And I've found it to be a really interesting thing from a management perspective when you ask that question. When you hire somebody, okay, we're going to hire this person, we're excited. Did you consider other candidates? Did you consider diverse candidates? Was there a consideration of your team dynamic? Have you looked at the overall composition of the team? It doesn't mean that you're just driving on a quota. It means that you're at least asking and making sure you have the data in front of you. And sometimes the data is really illuminating. I mean, to your point, Lindsay, one can assume that you don't have a problem, but you don't actually know that until you start seeing what the information is and what are the dynamics on the team that are affecting that,
Justin, if I might add to the conversation, just picking up on some of the threads that I've just heard too, which I think is really interesting about the profession, and we talk about pay parity. Privacy is becoming such a big tent, and we hear that from kind of Susan's journey and stuff. There's lawyers, there's non-lawyers, there's privacy product managers, program managers, privacy engineers, and it's really interesting to look at the various verticals when you're sort of comparing for parity, because even some of those roles and job families have different pay structures. And so it's interesting to think about the larger tent of privacy and when you're comparing job families across, which maybe some of the work that you did, Lindsay, at Salesforce too. But I think it's interesting as you're figuring out what your value is and you're comparing sort of like with like and roles and responsibilities and those types of things. It's such a broad profession. I'm often reminded by many folks that it's not just lawyers, and it's just such an emerging field. And so that's exciting and to be celebrated, I think.
Totally agree. I totally agree. Well, I knew this would happen, but we've taken up most of the hour with a just really thoughtful discussion on a number of different topics. I want to make sure I give one more chance just as we're closing. Advice for the community, how to actually, we've had a number of folks who have asked, how do I find a mentor like you? How did you find your mentors? How did are there pieces of advice you can bring at this moment to folks who are watching about how they can get mentorship, get that advice that you might need to move your career forward? And let me just say on behalf of Dan, and Dan, obviously you can close too, I really appreciate all four of you willing to join us today and share your insights with the community on Women's Equality Day. It's an important day. It's one that we should continue to recognize. I know this is not quite on topic, but I will also say on almost every session we've had over the last couple of months, Dan, we've had to also call out a really horrific additional issue in the civil rights world. And the James Blake issue, I'll just say, I'm constantly just asking, what is going on? I don't know all the facts, so let me just say, but I can barely watch the video in any way, watching a man be chased into his car with 3 children in the back, being shot, 6 or 7 times. It's just horrific. And I didn't want a session like this to go by where we didn't at least acknowledge a really horrific scenario. We have to be asking ourselves as a country, what is going on? That is going on so often that virtually every month that we have guests on, we're talking about one of these things that from every rational observer just makes no sense. So I do want to make sure I at least brought that out on a day of equality, but give everybody a chance to talk about, your own perspectives and what you can bring in terms of advice for folks who are looking to move into leadership positions like each of you. And Susan, maybe we could go in the reverse order this time. If you want to start, any advice for the community as we're wrapping up today?
Sure. I guess I would just say, if you can be an advocate, be an advocate. And if you see someone that needs help them. I think that just anyone's career journey, it's not just you, it's the network around you. And it's something that people can help very early on in their careers to much later. It's just, if you can find a way to help somebody, pay it forward, and they'll pay it forward too. And pretty soon we'll all be in a better place. So,
Lindsay, do you?
Very similar to Susan, it's on building relationships. I mean, privacy really at the end of the day is about people. That's why we're in this space, is that we're talking about protecting rights of people and really focusing on the relationships. And if you're more junior in your career, don't hesitate to reach out to someone who's more senior that you admire or you want to build a relationship. And if you're more senior, really to Susan's point, to pay it forward. While it's become a much larger profession, it's still a very small world, and investing in those relationships is just going to pay back in spades.
Oh, that's great advice. Tanisha?
Yep. Totally echo those sentiments. And I saw in the chat that wanting to understand a difference between mentorship and sponsorship. And yes, there is a difference. And the first step is to identify mentors. And similar to what, the other ladies mentioned, it's really about the coaching, the advice, being able to reach out, get guidance, pointing you in the right direction. And what sponsorship is really is like someone in your organization or outside your organization. You may not talk to them as frequent as you talk to your mentors, but they use their political capital, they use their connections to make room for you where room needs to be made. They pull you into rooms that you don't have access to. They find opportunities they think that will accelerate your career. And that tends to happen, organically, or sometimes there are programs that do that, like Deloitte has programs, but organically, the way that you find a sponsor is just really being on top of your stuff, building the relationships, like Lindsay said, really owning in on your competence, because those sponsors are usually looking for people like, what can I do to help that person? I see that they're a star. They just need to be pulled up. So a lot of this is going to be like, push, pull, comms, like going and engaging and finding mentors. And a lot of it is working on yourself so that you are like identified or discovered.
Honestly, great advice too. And so then with that, Elisa, last word.
Hard to do anything other than put an exclamation point on all the great things that have been said, but it's often the case that women have to work so much harder to get to where they are. Even if the numbers are good or getting better, it really does take a village. I think we've heard that. I think I can speak for everyone on the panel in saying that I feel an incredible sense of responsibility in the role that I've been given. And I'm really excited to, as I know my fellow panelists are, really accept into the opportunity that we have around the power that we're given to hold space and open doors for others, and just really excited about the future of the profession and women in the profession and everything ahead.
No, I appreciate it, Elisa. And for me, thank you again to each of you for coming to speak today. I really appreciate it. It's a really thoughtful conversation. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dan to wrap this up.
Yeah, well, thank you all for joining us. I think your stories are really interesting, inspiring, helpful to people in the field and interested in the field. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us today. It's really been a wonderful conversation. So thank you. And with that, goodbye, everybody.
Yep. Bye. See you soon.